After my husband died, I found a contact in his phone named Do Not Call. I pressed the call button. A message appeared at the screen. I'm waiting for you at the cabin by the lake, alone. I froze, but decided to go. I'm glad you're here with me. Please listen to my story till the end and let me know which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. I used to think grief worked like a tide, coming in, going out, leaving things a little rearranged but still recognizable. I was wrong. After my husband Mark died, nothing resembled the life I thought we'd built. Everything felt unmoored, as if one wrong step would send me drifting into dark water. Maybe that was why I clung to routines, grocery runs on Wednesdays, laundry on Saturdays, the evening walk around the neighborhood. I told myself structure was a comfort. In truth, it was a shield. Our house in northern Michigan had always been quiet, but after his death, the silence felt punitive. I kept expecting to hear him set his coffee mug down too loudly, humming to himself while rummaging through the pantry. For weeks, I listened for sounds that would never come. It was easier than confronting the more complicated absence, answers to questions I didn't even know I had yet. Going through his things was the hardest part. I kept postponing it, telling myself I wasn't ready. But then the bills started coming, and the executor needed documents, and I had to face the mess he left behind. Mark wasn't disorganized, but he had a habit of keeping things close to the chest. I used to think it was just part of his personality. Quiet, private, self-contained. I'd loved that about him once. Now, digging through drawers of folded receipts and mismatched passwords scribbled on Post-its, I began noticing things I couldn't quite explain. There were purchases I didn't recognize. 2 hotel transactions in Traverse City from last fall. He had told me he was attending a conference in Grand Rapids that weekend. I wondered briefly if it was a mistake, but the dates lined up too neatly. I set the papers aside, promising myself I'd revisit them later. Instead, I pushed them into a folder with tax documents and tried very hard to forget they existed. But the little things kept resurfacing. A key I didn't recognize on a ring with our house and car keys. A receipt for a canoe rental neither of us ever used. A prescription bottle for anxiety medication he'd never mentioned. Each one felt like a pebble being dropped into my stomach, small but impossible to ignore. The week after the funeral, a woman I barely knew, Carol from church, stopped by with a casserole. She hugged me too tightly and held on too long. When I pulled back, her eyes darted toward the stairwell as if expecting someone else to appear. "He talked about you a lot," she said. "What do you mean?" I asked. But she only shook her head, muttered something about how he'd been under stress, and hurried out the door before I could question her further. It nagged at me for days. What stress? He'd never said a word. Not to me. The first truly unsettling moment came 2 weeks later. I received a thin envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside was a maintenance invoice for a property I'd never heard of. Lakeshore Cabin, County Route 14. His name was listed as the owner. My first thought was that it had to be a clerical mistake. But the invoice had his signature. His unmistakable scrawl, half cursive, half cramped print. I placed it on the kitchen table and stared at it for a long time. My hands trembled in a way I hadn't felt since the morning I signed his death certificate. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe he'd invested in something without telling me. Maybe it was temporary, a project, a rental, a favor for a friend. Mark was capable of being impulsive in small ways. But a secret cabin? Why? I didn't bring it up to anyone. I didn't want to hear that I'd missed something obvious. I didn't want to hear the word affair, even if part of me had already whispered it. I distracted myself with tasks, sorting legal documents, cleaning out closets, preparing the house for sale, even though I wasn't sure I'd actually go through with it. But each day felt like walking through fog, dense, uncomfortable, laced with shapes I couldn't quite discern. Then came the night everything cracked. I'd been sitting at the dining table surrounded by paperwork, Mark's phone resting beside me. It took me a long time to even turn it on. The battery had died weeks ago, and just picking it up made my throat tighten. It felt invasive, disrespectful even, but I couldn't ignore the growing sense that I needed answers. Once it powered up, notifications blinked awake, old messages, missed calls from coworkers, reminders he'd never see again. I went through them carefully, trying not to feel like a thief in my own marriage. Then I saw the contact. Do not call. The name alone startled me. Mark wasn't dramatic. He would have labeled anything complicated with something vague like meeting or work. But this was too explicit, too deliberate. My pulse quickened. I felt ridiculous for hesitating, but I did. I must have stared at that contact for a full minute, my thumb hovering over the screen. Who hides a contact like that? And what kind of relationship needs such a warning? I reminded myself he was gone, that whatever truth waited behind that name, I deserved to know it. So I tapped call. The line connected almost immediately without a ring. A soft click, then silence. I was just about to hang up when a text appeared on the screen. Waiting for you at the lake cabin. Come alone. I froze. I didn't breathe. The message felt like a cold hand closing around my ribs. A cabin, the cabin. The same one from the invoice. And they were waiting for me. I sat there, hands trembling, staring at the phone. My first thought was fear. My second was confusion. My third was something darker. Anger, maybe. Or the beginning of a truth I didn't want to face. Whoever sent that message knew Mark was dead. They expected me. Why? That question hung in the air like smoke as I stood up, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles whitened. I should have ignored it. I should have called someone, anyone. But I didn't. Instead, I felt myself moving toward the hallway, toward my coat, toward the car keys I still hadn't taken off Mark's keyring, because whatever waited for me at that cabin, I needed to know. And I was already in too deep to turn away. I didn't drive to the cabin that night. I couldn't. After the initial jolt of adrenaline faded, something colder and sharper cut through me. Logic. If someone was waiting for me, and if that someone wasn't a friend, stepping into the dark alone would have been the stupidest thing I could do. So instead, I sat in my car in the driveway, gripping the steering wheel, breathing through the tremor in my hands. The message repeated itself in my head, almost like a chant. Waiting for you. Come alone. Why me? Why now? Why so certain I'd come? The porch light flickered in the wind, casting long shadows across the yard, and for the first time since Mark's death, I felt genuinely unsafe. It wasn't grief or confusion anymore. It was something sharper, something that made the air feel thin. I killed the engine, went back inside, locked the door, then checked it twice. Only then did I let myself sit down on the staircase and feel the full weight of everything pressing against me. Once the panic settled, practical thoughts began lining up like soldiers. If Mark really owned a cabin, and clearly he did, what else had he hidden? If someone else knew about it, knew me, what did they want? And why communicate only after his death? The losses hit me like a quiet avalanche. My husband, my sense of safety, my marriage as I thought I knew it, my understanding of the man I'd built a life with. But underneath that grief, something else began gathering, a need to stop being the last to know things about my own life. Fear pulsed through me, but it wasn't paralyzing, it was instructive. I got up, went to the kitchen, filled a glass with water, and forced myself to drink. I needed a clear mind. Panic was a luxury I couldn't afford now. What could the message possibly be about? A lover, a debt, some kind of arrangement, a threat? The problem was, any answer felt possible. The next morning, I woke up feeling older. Not physically, emotionally, as if the night had peeled away a layer of naivete I didn't realize I'd been wearing. I moved slowly, deliberately, made coffee, stared out the kitchen window at the street, thought about how normal everything looked and how abnormal it felt inside me. I decided my first step needed to be information, not confrontation. So I took out Mark's folder, the one I'd been avoiding, and spread its contents across the dining table. Papers, receipts, tax forms, insurance policies, bank statements, the cabin invoice. I organized them by date, trying to see patterns. It felt like assembling a puzzle with half the pieces missing. 2 accounts I didn't recognize. Several cash withdrawals over the past year. A quarterly maintenance payment to the same Lakeshore Property Services listed on the invoice. And strangest of all, a P.O. box number he'd never mentioned. Not once. My stomach tightened. He'd been hiding more than a cabin. But hiding from whom? Me or someone else? I spent almost 2 hours combing through everything, but the picture stayed blurry. Still, the general outline was undeniable. Mark had a separate life. Maybe not a full double life, but something with edges sharp enough to leave cuts. The next step required courage I wasn't sure I had. I Googled the cabin's address. It existed. A small property near Lake Huron, quiet, remote, mostly used for fishing retreats. Nothing about it felt illegal, nothing felt dramatic, which somehow made it worse. Then I checked the county property records. His name was there. Official. Confirmed. Which meant this wasn't a mistake. He had owned it for at least 3 years. I leaned back in my chair, pressing my palms against my eyes. Why hadn't he told me? What reason could justify something like this? Fear crept back in, unwelcome but familiar. I felt small inside my own home, as if someone were standing just outside the window, watching. I double-checked the locks again. By afternoon, I knew I had to stop spiraling. I needed direction, action. So I decided to call the county office under the guise of a routine inquiry. My voice trembled at first, but I steadied it. The clerk confirmed ownership, taxes, maintenance logs. Then she said something that made me grip the counter so tightly my knuckles hurt. Oh, yes, he had an emergency contact listed. Want me to read it to you? Of course I did, but I forced myself to sound casual. Yes, please. There was a rustle of paper. Then, it says, Angela Pierce. My heart dropped. Angela wasn't me. The clerk continued, oblivious to the weight of her words. And there's a note. Use only if necessary. I ended the call as politely as I could, but the moment the phone clicked, I felt the room tilt. A name, a real, tangible person connected to the cabin. Someone important enough that Mark listed her as his emergency contact. Not me, his wife. I sat down on the floor, right there in the kitchen, feeling the sting of betrayal in a place deeper than anger. Whatever this was, it was serious. But the shock didn't swallow me. It sharpened me. If Angela Pierce knew about the cabin, if she was the one who had texted me, then she might know what Mark had been hiding, and she clearly expected me to come, which meant she wasn't afraid of me. Or she thought she had nothing to hide, or she believed I was too naive to be a threat. I wiped my face with my sleeve. No more guessing, no more spirals. I opened my notebook, drew a line down the center. On the left, what I know. On the right, what I need to find out. The left column was short, pathetic, really. But the right column grew fast. Then slowly a plan emerged. Not to confront her, not yet. First, I needed to see the cabin for myself before meeting anyone connected to it. I needed to understand the ground I was standing on, literally. I circled the date on the calendar. Tomorrow morning, daylight, no risks I couldn't control. If someone was waiting for me, they'd find me on my terms. Fear still lived in me, but it no longer dictated my choices. Now it fueled them. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, the message flashed across my mind like a flare. I kept seeing the cabin, imagining it in different shapes, abandoned, occupied, dangerous, innocent. I imagined someone waiting inside, a woman, a stranger, someone who knew more about my husband than I ever had. By morning, my nerves felt stretched thin, but a strange calm settled over me. Maybe that's what resolve feels like. Fear that's been rearranged into something steadier. I made coffee, packed a thermos, grabbed a notebook, and left the house just after sunrise. The sky was muted, the kind of gray that promised rain but never delivered. Michigan mornings always had a chill, even in early summer. I wrapped my sweater tighter and drove east toward Huron County. The roads grew emptier as the miles passed. More trees, fewer houses, an occasional fishing sign, a cluster of mailboxes sagging at the end of long dirt drives. Everything looked familiar, but also foreign, like I'd stepped into a version of my life I was never supposed to see. I turned onto County Route 14, following the GPS coordinates from the invoice. The road narrowed, gravel kicking up behind me. The lake peeked through the trees on my left, calm and indifferent. My heart thudded harder as the driveway appeared. A wooden sign, worn by weather, read, "Lakeshore Cabin, Private." So it was real, desecratingly real. I parked halfway down the drive, close enough to retreat if I needed to. I listened. No voices, no footsteps, no car, just birdsong and the hiss of wind through the pines. I stepped out slowly. The cabin came into view piece by piece. First the roofline, then the porch, then the full structure. It looked small, tidy, maintained, not abandoned. The kind of place someone cared for, someone who wasn't me. Each step toward it felt like trespassing into a marriage I thought I understood. I stopped at the base of the porch stairs. My pulse hammered in my ears. What was I expecting? A note? A body? A woman waiting inside? I hesitated, then did something that felt like my first official step into the truth. I pulled out my phone and took pictures of the mailbox, the porch, the cabin number, the property sign, documentation, evidence, something tangible. I wasn't breaking in, I wasn't touching anything, just observing, but it still felt like crossing a line. Before I could climb the steps, I heard a car approaching. My stomach dropped. I turned. Dust lifted from the road as a silver SUV rolled slowly toward the drive, too slowly like the driver was assessing me before committing. I stepped back instinctively. The SUV stopped several yards away. A woman stepped out, mid-40s, sharp features, dark hair pulled into a tight ponytail. She wore a fitted coat despite the mild weather. She carried herself with the kind of contained confidence I recognized instantly. She knew exactly where she was. She knew who she expected to see, and she sure as hell hadn't expected me. Her eyes fixed on mine, narrowing. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice calm, almost rehearsed. My throat tightened. This had to be her, Angela Pierce. I kept my voice steady. "I'm Mark Hollis's wife." A flicker, barely perceptible, crossed her face. Not shock, not guilt, something colder. Calculation. "I see," she said quietly. "I'm sorry for your loss." But her tone wasn't sorry, it was wary. I didn't move. She didn't approach. "How long have you been coming here?" I asked. "That's none of your business." Her answer hit me like a slap. It wasn't defensive, it was dismissive. My pulse spiked, but I forced myself to breathe. "I think it is." She crossed her arms, looking at me as if deciding whether I was a threat or an inconvenience. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "This place wasn't meant for you." The certainty in her voice chilled me. I stepped closer, not toward her, but toward the truth. "Did you send the message last night?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The stillness around her said enough. "I have questions," I said, "and I'm not leaving until I get them." Her expression hardened into something unwelcoming. "If you knew Mark at all," she said sharply, "you'd know he wanted to keep certain things separate." Something in me snapped. I was his wife, I said. What could he possibly need to keep separate from me? We stared at each other across the gravel, neither moving. The silence stretched long, thin, dangerous. Finally, she exhaled, as if conceding a point she didn't want to acknowledge. "Fine," she said. "He told me you might come. Eventually." My breath caught. "He knew?" She nodded once. "He said you'd look for answers after everything. Everything. His death, his secrets, his second life. I wasn't ready for the next blow." "He left something here," she said. "For you." I froze. A part of me didn't want it. A deeper part needed it. She reached into her SUV, pulled out a small metal lockbox, and set it on the hood. It scraped against the paint. "He told me to give this to you only if you came on your own," she said. "Not if you were told, not if you were pressured." "That text," I whispered, "that was you telling me." "No," she said slowly, "it wasn't." Cold prickled down my spine. If it wasn't her, then who the hell was texting me from Mark's phone? She pushed the lockbox toward me. "Take it. But understand, once you open it, you can't undo what you learn." I stared at the box, at her, at the cabin. Then I reached for it. Her voice cut through the air, low and warning. "Be careful. You're not the only one looking for answers." Before I could respond, she got into her SUV, turned around, and drove off without another word. The wind pressed against the trees. The lake murmured somewhere behind the cabin, and I stood there holding the lockbox that might explain everything, or destroy whatever I still believed about my husband. This was my point of no return, and for the first time, I knew I wasn't the only person involved in this story. For a long moment after Angela's SUV vanished behind the trees, I just stood there with the lockbox pressed against my ribs. The air felt too still, too aware of me. Even the lake sounded suspicious, whispering against the shoreline like it was repeating something I should have understood by now. I didn't open the box right away. Instinct told me not to. Instead, I carried it back to the car, set it gently on the passenger seat, and locked all the doors before driving away from the cabin. My pulse thudded in my throat the entire time, like I was being watched, even though I saw no one. Only when I reached the main road did I allow myself to breathe normally. My first plan, the one I'd scribbled into my notebook, had been simple. Go to the cabin, see it, document it, leave. Now it had become something else entirely. There was an object in my possession that someone, maybe more than one someone, wanted me to have or wanted me never to see. I hated that I couldn't tell which. I drove straight to the sheriff's substation in town, not to make a report. Not yet. I told myself I was just gathering information, but it was my first actual official step, engaging with law enforcement in a way that could later anchor my decisions. I asked the deputy on duty a general question about property disputes, about what a spouse is entitled to know after someone's death. I made sure to sound like a grieving widow, because that's what I was, and because I needed him to keep talking. He explained that in Michigan, hidden assets could complicate estate proceedings, that if my husband had a secondary residence I didn't know about, the law required full disclosure, that sometimes third parties tried to interfere if money or property were involved. His words settled over me like a slow exhale. Interfere, third parties, assets. This wasn't just emotional anymore. This had legal weight. Before leaving, I asked casually whether there were any recent complaints or incidents near County Route 14. The deputy glanced at his screen, frowned slightly. There was a disturbance call last week. No details here, just that a passerby reported shouting by the lake. Patrol found nothing. My stomach tightened. What day? Last Thursday, the night before Mark died. I left the building colder than I'd entered. By the time I reached home, I knew I couldn't open the lockbox alone. Not yet. I needed a controlled environment, a strategy, a witness if things went wrong. But I couldn't ignore it either. I set the box on the dining table, its metal surface catching the late afternoon light. There was no keyhole, only a combination dial. That alone told me Mark expected someone specific to open it. Someone who knew his numbers, anniversaries, birth dates, PIN codes. I tried the obvious ones. Nothing. I tried our wedding date. Nothing again. Then I froze. He always used the same code for luggage locks, the month he left for college. It was a number he'd said represented the first time he chose something for himself. I turned the dial, 097. A soft click answered. My breath caught. The lid lifted smoothly. Inside, there were 3 things. A folded legal document, a prepaid flip phone, and a photograph. The photograph stopped my heart cold. Mark standing beside Angela on the cabin porch, his arm around her shoulders, not like lovers, but familiar, comfortable, as if they'd known each other for years. I sank into the chair, the edges of the room going soft. Was she family, a friend, something more complicated? The document came next. It was a notarized letter, dated 8 months before his death. A directive, a warning, a request for protection. From whom? From what? The details were vague, almost obscured on purpose, but one sentence stood out in sharp, undeniable relief. If anything happens to me, do not trust anyone who contacts you first. My throat tightened painfully. Then who had messaged me? Whoever it was, they had gotten to Mark's phone. They wanted me at the cabin, alone. A hard knock on the front door made me jump so violently I nearly knocked over the lockbox. I froze. 3 more knocks, louder this time. I didn't move for several seconds, my breath shallow. Then I slipped the photograph and letter back inside the box, snapped it shut, and hid it under a stack of newspapers on the counter. When I finally opened the door a crack, 2 figures were standing on the porch. Mark's cousin, Stephen, tall, brusque, always too interested in our finances, and his wife, Lorna, smiling in that brittle, sugary way that never reached her eyes. They didn't wait for an invitation. They stepped inside like they owned the place. "We heard you were asking around about the cabin," Stephen said, scanning the house as if looking for something or someone. My stomach dropped. How would they know that already? "I wasn't asking," I lied, "just sorting paperwork." "Ah," Lorna said lightly, "because rumors travel. You know how people talk." I said nothing. My hands curled into fists in my sleeves. Stephen leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Listen, if Mark left anything complicated behind, it's better not to get involved. Some things are messy for a reason." It wasn't advice, it was a warning. I held his stare. "I'm not intimidated." "You should be," he said, voice flat. "People get hurt digging into things that aren't theirs." Lorna tugged at his sleeve, feigning embarrassment. "Ignore him. Grief brings out the worst." But her eyes said she agreed with him completely. They stayed only a few minutes, but the tension they left behind lingered like smoke. After they drove off, I locked the door, then the back door, then every window. Angela, the unknown texter, Stephen and Lorna. Different motives, same pattern. Everyone wanted me ignorant. That night, I didn't open the lockbox again. I hid it inside a fireproof safe Mark kept under the bed. An irony so sharp it almost made me laugh. Then, for the next 3 days, I stepped back. Not to retreat, to think, to breathe, to gather myself before the next inevitable move. Because the threats didn't frighten me into silence. They clarified something profound. If Mark had trusted me enough to leave me that box, then I owed him the truth, no matter who tried to stop me. And I was done being afraid of the dark corners of his life. It was time for the people in those corners to be afraid of me. The 3 days I took for myself weren't peaceful, but they were necessary. I kept the curtains half closed, stayed close to home, and tried to steady the jitter in my chest that hadn't left me since Angela handed me the lockbox. It wasn't fear anymore. It was vigilance, a sharper, more alert state. Like the air in my house had shifted and I had to keep listening for something I couldn't name. But the strangest thing happened during those 3 days. Nothing. No messages, no knocks, no SUVs idling near the curb. That silence didn't bring comfort. It brought clarity. They were waiting, watching, calculating their next move. On the 4th morning, it arrived. A letter. Hand-delivered, not mailed. No return address. My name written in a rounded script I didn't recognize. The envelope felt too heavy for its size, and for a moment I debated throwing it straight into the trash. But avoiding information had never protected me before, so I opened it. Inside was a short note. "We can help you sort out everything Mark left behind. Let's avoid making things harder than they need to be." No signature, but a business card slipped out behind it. A wealth management firm downtown. On the back, "Ask for Lorna." My stomach curled. So this was their soft approach. I sat at the kitchen table for nearly an hour staring at the card. What exactly were they offering? To help? To redirect me? To absorb the cabin into some quiet estate process where I'd never see the truth? It took effort not to laugh at the absurdity of it. Stephen and Lorna never lifted a finger unless there was profit at the end of the arm. So this was their next tactic. Not threats, but temptation. Compliance dressed as convenience. I placed the business card on the counter, far from the lockbox, and let my mind settle into a colder place. They thought I was fragile. They thought with enough pressure and enough gentle persuasion, I'd fold. But grief doesn't make you weak. It makes you precise. Later that afternoon, Lorna texted me, this time from her own number. "Thinking of you. Let us take some of the burden off your shoulders. Coffee tomorrow?" There it was, the coaxing, the sweetness, the bait. I typed back, "No, thank you," and left it at that. Not rude, not defensive, just final. Her reply came quickly. "We're only trying to help. You don't want to get overwhelmed. Paperwork can be so confusing." I put the phone face down on the table and felt the edge of something steady rise inside me. Something like resolve with the temperature of ice. They would keep trying to reel me back into their version of the story. But they didn't understand I'd stopped living inside their expectations the moment I opened the lockbox. Still, even cold resolve has limits. By evening, I felt the weight of exhaustion creeping in, a bone-deep tiredness that had nothing to do with sleep. I'd been fighting alone for weeks, against shadows I couldn't fully identify, against secrets that didn't belong to me but had landed in my lap anyway. I needed another mind, another voice, someone who wasn't trying to manipulate me in one direction or another. I considered calling my sister, but she'd worry in a way that would derail my focus. I couldn't afford that. Instead, I thought of someone I hadn't spoken to in months. My neighbor from 2 streets over, Evelyn. She was a retired court clerk, practical, calm, and blessedly uninterested in meddling. She'd handled more legal messes in her 30 years at the courthouse than most attorneys I knew, and she liked Mark, but she'd never been blinded by him. The next morning, I baked muffins, an excuse, a buffer, and walked to her house with the container tucked under my arm. The air was crisp and the sky finally clearing, but my nerves jittered with each step. When she opened the door, her eyes widened first in surprise, then concern. "Well, honey, you look like someone carrying too much alone. Come in." Her living room smelled faintly of lavender, quilts folded neatly over the sofa, a life arranged, calm, and long-lived. I hesitated only a moment before sitting across from her. "I need to tell you something," I said, "and I need you to tell me if I've completely lost my mind." "Fair trade," she said, and waited. So I told her. Not everything. Not the message from the unknown sender, not the shouting at the lake the week before Mark died, but enough. Enough to paint a picture without collapsing under its weight. I told her about the cabin, the lockbox, Angela, the cousins, the pressure. Her face remained still, but I saw her thoughts moving behind her eyes, assembling, categorizing. When I finished, she leaned back. "I'll tell you one thing," she said. "People don't hide property unless they're hiding something bigger with it. And people don't pressure a widow into dropping questions unless they're afraid of what she'll find." I exhaled, tension slipping off me like a tight coat. "So I'm not imagining it?" "No, sweetheart, you're seeing what's there, and it's scaring them." The validation hit me harder than I expected. My throat tightened with a kind of relief I hadn't felt since Mark died. Evelyn reached over and squeezed my hand. "You need to stay calm and stay smart, but you're on the right track." I nodded, absorbing her steadiness like warmth from a fire. She added, "And don't meet with those cousins alone again. They play dirty." "I won't," I said. As I walked home, the sky brightened into a pale blue, thin and honest. For the first time in days, the air didn't feel heavy. My steps felt firmer, more intentional. They had tried tempting me, softening me, guiding me back into ignorance. But instead, they'd done the opposite. They'd shown me their nerves, their eagerness to keep me compliant, their fear. And now I had something they didn't expect me to have, a witness, a sounding board, a small but sturdy piece of support. I wasn't alone anymore, and that made me more dangerous than before. The morning after I spoke with Evelyn, I woke with a sense of direction I hadn't felt in weeks. It wasn't peace, not exactly, but something like a boundary reforming around me, a line I hadn't realized I needed until now. I brewed coffee, opened the blinds for the first time since the confrontation with Stephen and Lorna, and let the cold Michigan light settle on the kitchen floor. I told myself it was just a day, like any other, but I knew better. Things had shifted. I had shifted. And that's almost always when pressure pushes back. It started around noon. A car door slammed outside, sharp, too close. I looked through the living room window and felt my stomach tighten. Not Angela, not someone anonymous. It was Lorna. She was alone this time, dressed in a soft beige coat and carrying a tin of cookies, as if we were two friendly neighbors exchanging pleasantries. The image was so absurd, it felt almost theatrical. She rang the doorbell twice. I didn't move. The third ring was longer, insistent. Finally, I opened the door but didn't invite her in. She smiled, a wide, choreographed expression too enthusiastic for the context. "There you are. I've been worried." I raised an eyebrow. "That's surprising." She blinked, choosing not to acknowledge the sarcasm. "May I come in? I wanted to talk openly, without Stephen." That alone was suspicious enough to make me step back, but not aside. "What do you want?" She lowered her voice, leaning forward slightly. "To clear the air." I didn't trust that phrase. People who want to clear the air usually want to control what's floating in it. "I'd rather talk out here," I said. For a split second, irritation flashed across her face, sharp, undiluted, but she replaced it instantly with a patient smile. "Fine," she said. "Whatever makes you comfortable." She held out the tin. "I made these last night. Thought you could use something sweet." I stared at it without taking it. "Say what you came to say." Her smile tightened. "All right. I know we came off overly protective before. That wasn't our intention. We care about you, about Mark's legacy." There it was, the pivot. Mark's legacy, not my well-being. "And?" I asked. "And," she continued carefully, "we think you're overwhelmed. All this digging, it's not healthy. It's confusing things that don't need to be confused." I felt my jaw tense. "I'm not confused at all." "Oh, honey." She reached out as if to touch my arm. I stepped back. Her hand fell awkwardly to her side. "Look," she said, dropping the sweetness, "let's not pretend Mark's last year wasn't turbulent. He was making rushed decisions, acting strangely, keeping distance from everyone, including you. We all saw it." My chest tightened. It was a knife masked as concern. "And you think that justifies hiding a cabin?" I asked. She hesitated, a tiny telling beat. "We didn't say hiding, just mismanaging, and when people mismanage, others get hurt. That's what we're trying to prevent." The message underneath was clear. Stop looking. Stop asking. Stop pulling on the threads. I folded my arms. "Tell me the truth, Lorna. Why do you care what I find?" She inhaled slowly, nostrils flaring, a subtle sign she was losing patience. Then she dropped the mask entirely. "Because you're in over your head," she snapped. "And because if you keep going, you're going to destroy whatever good memory of Mark you have left." There it was, blunt emotional manipulation, designed to destabilize me. "My memory of Mark isn't your responsibility," I said. "And it never was." Her eyes narrowed. We're trying to save you from making a spectacle of yourself before a messy situation becomes a public one." That was a threat, softened but unmistakable. "What situation?" I asked quietly. She pressed her lips together, realizing she'd said too much. "Just consider our offer. Let us handle the paperwork, the property, the loose ends. You don't have to be involved." "I am involved," I said. "He was my husband." Her expression cooled into something glacier-like. "He wasn't who you thought he was. I'm starting to realize that," I said, "but not in the way you think." For a moment, the air between us tightened. "Fine," her voice sharpened. "If you want to keep poking at things, go ahead, but don't say you weren't warned." She set the tin of cookies down on the porch railing, hard enough to make the lid clatter, and marched back toward her car. Before opening the door, she turned. "And stop involving other people," she said. "It makes this harder for everyone." I felt the blood drain from my face. Evelyn, they knew. Lorna wasn't threatening me anymore. She was threatening my support. When her car finally disappeared, I closed the door slowly and leaned against it, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Fear rose in me, hot, immediate, but underneath it was something stronger. Anger, calm, controlled, unmistakable anger. They didn't just want me to stop asking questions. They wanted me isolated. I walked to the kitchen, sat down at the table, and let the fear settle into something more useful, something colder. They were trying to intimidate me because I was getting close, closer than they expected, closer than they could afford. That realization steadied my breathing. I pulled the notebook back out, the one with 2 columns. What I know and what I need to find out. For the first time, the left column grew, and I kept writing, even as my hands trembled, because I wasn't stopping. Not now. Not after seeing their masks slip. Not after watching the fear in Lorna's eyes when she realized I wouldn't bend. Their anger didn't frighten me anymore. It fueled me. I closed the notebook gently, almost with reverence. Whatever was coming next, I was ready. The house was too quiet after Lorna left. A vacuum, a silence that didn't feel like stillness, but like pressure. The kind that settles right at the back of the skull. I stood at the kitchen counter with my palms pressed flat, breathing slowly, letting everything reorder itself inside me. Their fear had exposed something, and fear never appears without reason. I opened the lockbox again, not impulsively, but with a sense of ritual. The photograph, the notarized letter, the prepaid phone. I arranged them in a straight line on the table and stared at them until the pieces began forming a shape. Mark hadn't trusted them. He'd trusted me, and someone had been watching us both long before his death. The prepaid phone was still powered off. I turned it on. A single message blinked on the screen, old but unread. If you're seeing this, I may not have time to explain everything. My throat tightened. There was a second line, "Don't let them get control of the cabin." Them. He never named them, because he didn't trust writing their names anywhere. I sat down hard, feeling the weight of it. The cabin wasn't sentimental. It was leverage, evidence, a piece of something larger, a pattern I had refused to fully articulate until now. Stephen and Lorna didn't want the cabin because they cared about Mark's legacy. Angela didn't keep it secret out of loyalty to him, and the unknown texter wasn't luring me there without purpose. 3 separate lines of influence converging on one place. Something was hidden there. Something Mark feared would fall into the wrong hands. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. I needed to return to the cabin, but not alone. Not at night. Not without protection. I thought about calling Evelyn, but she didn't need to be dragged deeper. I needed someone official, neutral, someone whose presence couldn't be dismissed. So I drove to the sheriff's substation again. This time I didn't pretend. Inside, the deputy from earlier, Officer Randall, looked up, surprised to see me. "Ma'am?" I swallowed. "I need to file a concern, not a report. Not yet, just something documented." "What kind of concern?" So I told him. Not everything, but enough. Threatening behavior from relatives. A hidden property under my late husband's name. A stranger insisting he left something for me. An unexpected message urging me to come alone. He listened more intently than before. I saw it in the way he leaned forward, in the way his pen tapped slower. "You believe there's a risk of harassment?" he asked. "Yes," I said, "and possibly more, I don't know." He made notes, careful and slow. "Documenting it is smart," he said. "If anything escalates, we have a record." When I left, I felt something shift. Not in the world, but in myself. A sense of authority, of grounding, of no longer being a lonely widow fumbling in the dark. There was now a paper trail they couldn't erase. But confrontation has a way of finding people precisely when they feel strongest. As I walked to my car in the parking lot, I saw a figure leaning against the hood. "Stephen." My heart slammed once, then steadied. He pushed off the car, eyes narrowing. "We need to talk." "No," I said, unlocking the driver door. "We don't." He grabbed the top of the door before I could open it. Not roughly, just firmly enough to make a point. "Stop going to the cops," he said through clenched teeth. "You're making this worse." "For who?" I asked. He hesitated. It was too long of a pause, too revealing. "You're in danger," he said finally. I almost laughed. "From what? Or from who?" He pressed his tongue to his cheek, pupils flicking toward the station door as if deciding how much he could say with law enforcement just yards away. Then he lowered his voice. "There are things Mark was mixed up in that you don't understand. That cabin isn't a secret getaway. It's a liability. And if you walk into the wrong part of it, you'll drag us all down with you." "Us," I repeated. "So you are involved." His jaw clenched. "You're twisting my words." "No," I said softly. "You're avoiding mine." He exhaled, long and shaky. The first real crack I'd seen in him. "Just leave it alone," he said. "For your own good." But I caught something in his tone, a tremor he didn't mean to reveal. He wasn't warning me out of concern. He was warning me out of fear. "Because," I said slowly, "you're afraid of what I might find." "Stop," he snapped, voice cracking. "Just stop this before—" He shut his mouth abruptly, as if he'd walked too close to an edge. "Before what? Before I found what Mark had put in the cabin? Before whatever they'd all been hiding came out?" I stepped closer and his posture stiffened. "You know what he left there," I said, "don't you?" His eyes shifted, a flicker, a tell. And that was my answer. He backed away, muttered something under his breath, and climbed into his truck. The tires screeched as he peeled out of the lot. I stood there, pulse steady, breath controlled. He hadn't intimidated me. He'd confirmed everything. By the time I drove home, the world felt different, smaller, clearer. All the blurred edges of the past month snapped into sharp focus. I walked inside, locked the door, and pulled the photograph from the box again. Mark, Angela, the cabin. I turned it over. On the back, in Mark's handwriting, barely visible, "If they find this, everything ends." My hands went cold. Everything ends. Them, the threats, the secrecy. They weren't afraid of me finding an affair, or money, or a second life. They were afraid of exposure, something he'd hidden from them, something he'd entrusted to me. I set the photograph down carefully. The next step would be the final confrontation, the moment everything either locked into place or shattered. And I wasn't walking into it trembling. I was walking into it ready. I stared at Mark's handwriting until my eyes blurred. If they find this, everything ends. The weight of those words pressed through my ribs, into bone. The photograph, the lockbox, the prepaid phone, it wasn't random. It was planned, hidden, left specifically for me, which meant Mark knew this moment would come, and he had believed I would follow the trail. I breathed slowly, grounding myself, letting the fear sharpen instead of swallow. I knew what I had to do. The final piece wasn't here in my house. It was in the cabin, not the porch, not the main room, but the part Stephen had warned me about, the part he was terrified I'd enter. I waited until morning. Daylight, clear visibility, no risks I couldn't control. Before leaving, I took 3 things: the lockbox, my phone, and a printed copy of the notarized letter. Insurance, evidence, protection. Then I drove. The closer I got to Lake Huron, the more the air shifted, thin, metallic, a quiet tension humming beneath the surface. As I pulled into the cabin driveway, I noticed something immediately. A second car. Black sedan, windows tinted. My breath hitched. Not Angela's SUV, not Stephen's truck. Someone new. I parked farther back this time, angled toward the exit. Then I stepped out, scanning the tree line. A figure emerged from behind the cabin. A woman, tall, dark coat, imposing posture, and behind her, Angela. My pulse quickened, but I kept my expression neutral. Angela looked drained, almost frightened. The other woman looked like someone who didn't fear anything. She spoke first. "Mrs. Hollis." Her tone was too formal, too controlled. I didn't answer. "You shouldn't have come." Her voice carried the cold certainty of someone used to compliance. "You're interfering with matters you don't understand." Angela shifted uneasily beside her. I stepped closer. "Then explain." The woman's jaw tightened. "Your husband was involved in a financial discrepancy that affected several people, important people. He made mistakes, and the cabin contains documents that complicate the situation." There it was, the lie wrapped in a half-truth. "What kind of documents?" I asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she took a step toward the porch. Angela abruptly reached out and grabbed her sleeve. "Don't," she whispered. "She deserves to know the truth." The woman shot her a warning glare. Angela recoiled but didn't back down. "This isn't just about money," Angela said, her voice trembling. "Mark told me everything before he died. He knew they'd come after whatever he hid here." "They?" I asked. Angela nodded, eyes flicking to the woman beside her. "She's one of them." My stomach dropped. Angela continued, voice shaking but resolute. "Mark discovered irregularities in their company, illegal ones. He gathered evidence, contracts, transfers, signatures, enough to expose the entire operation." My pulse roared in my ears. The woman hissed, "Shut up, Angela." But Angela didn't. She pushed forward, desperate now. "He wanted to go to the authorities. He was scared they threatened him. And when he refused to stay quiet—" "He had an accident," the woman interjected with a cold smile. A dizzy wave washed through me. Mark's death, not sudden, not natural, engineered. I steadied myself on the porch railing, breath tight but controlled. "And now you want the evidence he left behind." "That evidence," the woman said calmly, "could destroy several lives." "Good," I said. Her eyes narrowed. "You think you understand what's at stake?" "I understand enough," I said, "and I'm not leaving." She took a step closer, posture widening. "You're making a mistake." "No," I said. "You are." I pulled my phone from my pocket and raised it slightly. "I already filed a concern with the sheriff's office. They know I'm here. They know about the threats. They know about the cabin. And if something happens to me, anything, there's a time-stamped record of every person who tried to stop me." Her jaw locked. A flicker of real panic flashed across her eyes. I pressed on. "And," I said softly, "a friend has a copy of the notarized letter. If she doesn't hear from me by tonight, she goes straight to law enforcement." Angela gasped quietly. The woman tensed. I held her stare. "You can't silence this anymore." Silence vibrated between us. Thick. Electric. Finally, she exhaled and took a backward step. "This isn't over," she said. "It is," I replied. Angela looked at me with a strange mix of guilt and gratitude. Then, without another word, the woman grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the sedan. Angela didn't resist, but she looked back at me before getting inside. A silent thank you. Or an apology. Maybe both. The car sped away, gravel spraying. The forest fell quiet again. Just me, the cabin, the cold morning air. I walked inside, heart pounding but steady. The place smelled faintly of cedar and dust. I navigated through the small living area, past the kitchenette, toward the back. The place Stephen warned me about. A narrow hallway led to a storage room with a door half hidden behind coats. I opened it. Inside, beneath a plastic tarp and a layer of old fishing supplies, was a small steel safe. The exact model Mark used at home. My hands trembled, not with fear, but with inevitability. I turned the dial. First try. His college month. The safe clicked open. Inside were stacks of folders, signed documents, emails printed and annotated, financial statements tying Stephen and several others to fraudulent transfers, and Mark's final note. "If you're reading this, I didn't make it in time. Give this to the authorities. Don't let them rewrite the truth." I pressed the paper to my chest. My throat tightened, but I didn't cry. I packed everything carefully into a waterproof bag, locked the cabin behind me, and drove straight to the sheriff's office. Not the substation, the main building. This time, I didn't ask for documentation. This time, I asked to speak with the detective, and when I placed the folders on his desk, I felt something inside me settle. Not peace, not closure, but victory. A quiet, unshakable victory. By evening, word had spread. Stephen was picked up for questioning. So was the woman in the black coat. Investigations opened, accounts frozen, names listed. Their empire of manipulation collapsed in a single day, and every time my phone buzzed, it wasn't a threat. It was law enforcement asking follow-up questions. I wasn't hiding anymore. I wasn't the one being hunted. I was the one exposing them. Everything Mark feared would happen to them. Happened. Without compromise, without mercy, without loopholes. The truth finally belonged to the right person. Me. The days after I handed everything to the detective felt unreal, quiet in a way I wasn't used to. Not empty quiet. Not the suffocating stillness that followed Mark's death. This was different. A steadiness. A slow return of air to the room. For the first time in weeks, I slept through the night. No knocks at the door, no watching cars, no pressure disguised as concern. Just mornings that felt like mornings again. Still, the aftermath wasn't gentle. The detective called me the next day with updates. His voice was careful but charged, like he was walking a line between professional distance and disbelief at the scope of what he'd uncovered. "Mrs. Hollis," he said, "the documents you provided, They're extensive and convincing. We've brought in several individuals for questioning. More may follow. I recognize the names he listed. Stephen, Lorna, the woman in the black coat. Her name was Clara Wexler, apparently tied to a private consulting firm that operated far too close to corporate compliance lines. He didn't tell me everything, not yet, but the tone said enough. The case was no longer a curiosity. It was a collapse. I hung up the phone and sat in the living room, letting the quiet settle around me. Evelyn came by that afternoon with a pot of soup and a look that said she hadn't slept well either. Not out of fear, but out of investment. "You did the right thing," she said as we ate at my kitchen table. "Most people would have backed down long before now." I smiled softly. "Most people don't end up in this situation. Most people don't have your backbone," she countered. Her faith in me felt larger than anything I'd carried these past months. I didn't deflect it. I let it in. Later that evening, my phone buzzed again. A text from an unknown number, but not threatening. A standardized police update. Search warrants executed. Evidence seized. Investigation active. A brief clinical confirmation that the wheels were turning far beyond my control. And for once, I didn't mind not being in control. The next week unfolded slowly but steadily. I cleaned the house. Not out of anxious compulsion, but because I finally could. The kitchen felt lighter, the hallway less claustrophobic. Even the rooms I used to avoid, his office, the bedroom closet, felt like they belonged to me again, not to a ghost of secrets. One afternoon, I opened the blinds in the living room fully. Sunlight filled the space, warm and unapologetic. I stood there for a long time, letting myself feel the difference. On the third day, I drove back to the cabin, not alone this time and not secretly. Officer Randall accompanied me, part documentation, part precaution. He walked the perimeter, took photographs, cataloged everything. "This place is going to be important evidence," he said. "You were right to come forward." I nodded, but my eyes weren't on him. They were on the lake, calm, unfazed, endless. The cabin no longer felt like a threat or a trap. It felt like a chapter, one that was finally closing. On the drive home, he said gently, "Your husband tried to do the right thing. It seems he needed help he didn't get in time." I didn't cry, I didn't break. I simply said, then I finished it for him. And that felt true. Meanwhile, the people who had tried to scare me into silence were unraveling. News traveled quickly in towns like ours. Stephen had been suspended from his firm pending investigation. Lorna resigned from her financial position before she could be asked to. Rumor had it she'd been escorted from the building. Clara's consulting contract was under review by multiple companies, not a good sign for someone who lived on reputation. No one approached me. No one tried to talk their way back into influence. No one appeared on my porch again. They didn't dare. One morning, while drinking coffee on the back patio, I saw a headline on my phone. "Local fraud investigation expands. Multiple resignations follow." The article didn't name me, didn't name Mark, but it detailed the very scheme he had tried to expose. The cabin wasn't mentioned either, but the investigation was growing, rippling outward from the evidence I'd delivered. It wasn't schadenfreude I felt. It wasn't revenge. It was justice settling into place, slow and heavy and right. Later that week, Angela called. Her voice was hushed but not fearful, just tired. "I wanted to thank you," she said. "Mark trusted you. He always said you were the one who saw him clearly." My chest tightened, but gently. "Why did he involve you at all?" "He didn't trust them," she said. "And he needed a witness outside the family, someone who knew pieces but not enough to be targeted. I breathed out. He should have told me. I think he was trying to protect you, she said. We didn't talk long, but the conversation left a sense of closure hovering in the room long after I hung up. The next morning, I drove to the lake alone, just to see it, just to breathe. The wind was soft, the water slow. The cabin locked now sealed until investigators were done. I didn't need to go inside. The truth wasn't in the walls anymore. It was already out in the world. I stood on the shore for a long time, not thinking of betrayal, not of fear, not even of secrets. Just forward motion. When I returned home, I opened a new notebook, a fresh one, clean pages, no columns for what I know or what I need to find out. This one was for me, my life, my next chapter. My handwriting looked steadier than it had in months. I wrote the date at the top and paused, feeling the room settle around me. No shadows, no surveillance, no pressure disguised as kindness. Just space, real quiet space. And for the first time since Mark's death, that quiet didn't feel threatening. It felt like freedom. Looking back now, I still ask myself how everything might have turned out if I'd ignored that one message on Mark's phone. Maybe silence would have been easier. But truth has its own gravity. And you? What would you have done in my place? Opened the door to danger or turned away from it? If my story made you think, stay with me. Leave a comment, share your thoughts, and join the community that grows around these tangled human truths. There are more stories waiting. Quiet ones, dangerous ones, the kind that begin with a single choice.